Welcome back to another Unified Mindfulness session. These sessions are focused on meditation for resilience. And today we're going to talk about the way of thoughts and emotions. And we're going to use a device called Hearing In, which I will explain to you. So we're about to embark on the long and windy path of insight called Vipassana in Buddhism. Vipassana means both to see with separation, to discern clearly the components of one's experience, and also to see through. And that is to gain a penetrating understanding into the nature of all experience. So the path begins with relatively gross or crude mental objects and sensations, but it gets more delicate and refined the longer you practice. And eventually you come to realize that your inner world is teeming with subtle activity. And it's kind of like background programs running, often unbeknownst to you on your laptop, slowing down all the processing. So as you bring more clarity and equanimity to your inner world, the processing gets more transparent and more efficient. So one of these activities is our thinking process. And for most of us, if we think of thinking at all, we imagine it as a kind of private upwelling or knowing. But actually, thinking is a sensory experience. It's made up of internal sounds, inner talk, insight or inner imagery, and feelings. This is the emotional body sensations. So over the period of this course, we're going to learn to identify these three components of thought, and the proposition of these different components changes from person to person. Some of us have more talk, others more imagery, others have more emotional body sensations. One of the fascinating things about meditation is learning your own unique mental and sensory fingerprint. Now, I'll tell you straight up, some people are really bothered by their thoughts. They think that when they're going to sit down and meditate, it means that they should simply be able to concentrate on their breath and get the thoughts to stop. And I just want to take you off the hook right now. Sometimes that does happen. Most often it doesn't. So thoughts, we can let our thoughts keep going. We just don't have to focus on them. So we can let the thoughts go by like clouds in the sky. And sometimes our thoughts aren't even that peaceful. Sometimes they don't gently go by. Sometimes they're noisy. And again, we're just separating out our awareness from the thoughts, not judging the thoughts as right or wrong. Likewise, with this piece about inner imagery, some people think in images, and some people who I've taught in meditation classes sit down to meditate, and they have images coming into their mind, and they're bothered by the images. And you don't have to be bothered by images. If you start getting images, the meditative technique is to simply allow them to be there. You might work with a technique where you have a neutral, non-judgmental, non-reactive approach in dealing with images, and you just let them be there. And you can tune your awareness on them, and you can take in all of the details of the image in a very neutral way, as if you were a journalist or an artist. And so we're just allowing whatever arises to arise. The key is not to make it a problem. And the same thing with body sensations. There's certain kinds of meditation practices you do that where you only focus in on body sensations. And sometimes an itch, people who do these practices will say like an itch, it feels like it's, an earthquake, or so. They just seem like they grow and they get so big and so loud, and it's almost like you can't even feel the rest of your body. All you feel is this itch that just keeps expanding out and out and out. And so that's what you get. That's your meditation that day. Usually the itch will fade away, but sometimes if you have an experience of having so much clarity into a sensation, the sensations suddenly feel really large, just like if you had a camera and you zoomed in on the image. So we're just trying to be at peace with whatever arises and just be present for it. So our thoughts can be a bit like constant background flicker and drone of the television in an airport waiting room. And we get so habituated that we stop noticing them. So meditating is like waking up with a start. It's a little drool on your chin and realizing that for the past 30 years, you've subjected yourself to nonstop stream of Happy Days reruns. And as I mentioned, one part of this for many people is our kind of caffeinated internal monologue. It's jabbering away at 120 beats per minute. So if you find that your mind is reeling, and it's not settling down, one technique is we can use the breath. It's called pranayama, and it simply means that we can use the breath to control the mind. So a pranayama technique that would quiet the mind would be, I'll show you something. Let's do this together. So I want you to sit up straight. We're going to do something called taking a vase breath, and it involves kind of tightening up your abdominals. So you're going to take a deep breath in, tighten your abs, take a little bit more breath in, you're going to hold it, and you roll the head to the right. Five times, and then still holding the breath. Five times to the left. Breathe out twice really quickly, like imagining that you're shooting air out the top of your head. That simple technique, it calms the mind, and it creates, like, you'll feel an energy that it almost feels a bit like water. It feels cool, like something's running down, and it pools up like nectar in your throat. So it brings openness to the central column. When the throat is open and relaxed, the mind is quiet. So if your mind is really chattering, you can also just simply put your awareness on your vocal cords and imagine that you tell your vocal cords to stop. Just like, stop, don't move. When the vocal cords get that message that they're not supposed to move, the mind goes quiet. So there's some little hacks like that you can do, but honestly, most people just observe the mind. And when the mind is really noisy and when it's really choppy and obnoxious, that's the meditation. You're just knowing that's how your mind is in that moment. If there's some inner talk and you want to just listen to it with a kind of a good-natured affection as much as you can muster, you can just listen to the inner chatter. The more you do this, the clearer and smoother the talk gets. And the specific techniques that we're using are called noting. And it's really about following whatever's happening in our experience with concentration and clarity and that Fonzarelli cool. So in this way, we get to know ourselves, and it's like we're on a date with ourselves. Who is this person? Like, who even knew that I had all this stuff going on in my head? Or who even knew that I was so angry that I could still feel it in my chest? And so, yeah, it's just a technique. Sometimes just bringing your attention to any inner talk will calm it down, and it'll bring longer periods of soothing silence into your head. And if this happens, just keep noting. Only Now listening to the silence itself with the same curiosity and affection and equanimity that you brought to the talk. So this is the other side of the coin. Eventually all thoughts fall away. Sometimes it takes a long time, like it probably took me 7 years, and then I could be in a thought-free state for a long time. And it took some getting used to. It's like, maybe I should have thoughts right now. And the thing is, you can have thoughts and you can use your thoughts. So you become the master of your mind. So eventually your thoughts aren't running you anymore. If you don't want to have thoughts, you don't have to have thoughts. If you don't have thoughts, you're just in stillness, which feels like bliss, because everything's so simple. There's nothing to be bothered by. But until you get to that point, we can welcome thoughts, we can observe thoughts. When stillness arises in moments, we can welcome that. And as your meditation practice develops, particularly if you were to sit, say, for an hour, then generally the thoughts start to become really quiet. They might become quiet after 20 or 30 minutes. But if we just sit in these quick little hits, then we have to have more tolerance for the mind chatter that's just doing what the mind does. So what are the benefits? No matter what the mental object you work with, there's always the general benefit that comes from boosting your level of concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity. And also there's psychological benefits specific to the practice. So you find that you get more space around your inner talk and your inner catastrophic and egoic or critic or whatever the other commentators you may have in there, then these voices don't get triggered in the same way. And you stop taking them so seriously. You stop believing your thoughts. You start to recognize that thoughts aren't even real things. They're just, you start to think that thoughts aren't even mine. You don't have to own them. They're just happenings. They're just mental phenomena, and you don't have to cling to them or let them define you in any way. So doing that is incredibly helpful. It's a strategy for dealing with stress and overwhelm. You can take any negative state, a limiting belief, a difficult emotion, a powerful but unproductive urge, and break it into these smaller and thus more manageable pieces, and in that way their power over you is weakened. So limiting beliefs are exposed, destructive urges are diffused, wrenching emotions are metabolized, and you begin to have more clarity, self-possession, and spaciousness, more autonomy. The path of insight is ultimately about orienting to a deeper part of yourself. So you may be getting the sense, as I'm sharing all this information, that this is deep. This isn't we're not in the shallows when we're meditating. We're actually going really deep. And for some of you, this might be territory you've never explored, and you might really like it. It might be like if you just took up rock climbing, you might just discover this whole new world of depth and meaning and texture and joy that you wouldn't have had access to otherwise. And this is the real ground of your life. Every time we meditate, we plunge our sword into the ground, and we can sit like a samurai, welcoming all the experiences with dignity and bravery and an open heart. So now we're going to get into the practice, and I want you to sit in a comfortable, dignified position. And then you're going to close your eyes, relax, and silently repeat some word to yourself. And the space in your head where you hear this mental talk is the domain that we're going to be working with. For many people, it's at the back of the head, down by the ears, or it may be vague or hard to find. That's okay. So right now, you could just say a couple words in your head, and you're trying to get a sense, a felt sense of where that is, and that's what we're tuning into. So from here on in, whenever you become aware of any talk activity in the space, a mental phrase or a word, commentary or judgment, You silently label this hearing in. So try it. Listen for something to arise in the mind. And in a very neutral way, you just label it hearing in. Then pour your auditory attention into the talk. Notice it with as much curiosity as you can muster. And thus the two-part noting process is acknowledging the talk with the label hear in, and then investigating the talk or investigating silence with affectionate fascination. So it's about 5% effort and 95% investigation. So we'll just work with it for a moment, listening to your talk, hearing in, and investigating with curiosity. What's being said? What does it trigger in your body as it's being said? Isn't that interesting? The talk, it might die immediately or it may persist. If it dies, then that's fine. That's actually a useful thing. You can hear into the silence. So there's a trick for silencing the inner voices. If the talk sticks around, listen with curiosity and let it play out. And repeat the acknowledging label hear in every few seconds or whatever pace is comfortable for you. It's possible that any mental talk might automatically just go silent. Or you may not have much inner talk, period. If this is the case, that's great. Listen to the silence. The absence of auditory talk is the presence of auditory rest. And so if you feel that rest, the silence and rest, you can label that hear rest. Try not to intentionally create the mental talk or to deliberately stop it. Let whatever happens, happen. Your job is simply to keep track. So it's almost like you're a guide dog and you're sniffing out whatever mental stuff is happening up there. You're just tracking it with curiosity. And you might find as your mind relaxes that there's actually different tapes playing, and some of the tapes seem to be way in the back and you almost can't make them out. It might be like muttering, and there might be like layers of activity. Some layers might be visual and some layers might be auditory, and it might even slice out like you can actually experience multiple up to 8 different layers or whatever. If that's the case, then you're just observing, hearing in, and remaining curious about what happens. So we'll continue now with this practice for several more minutes. And it can be useful to also notice what's happening in your body right now. Are you resistant to the practice? Are you open to the practice? Is there some strange kind of excitement that you haven't really felt with regard to the practice? And so we're just allowing whatever's there to be there. We're taking note of it. We're becoming really trained and engaged observers of our own experience. And we're not judging, we're allowing. So for the next several minutes, you'll do this on your own using the label here in or here rest. Staying with the practice even when it feels boring increases our concentration and clarity. It grounds us in equanimity. If you come up against content in your mind that you don't particularly like, you'd still just label it hearing in. But noticing that you don't like that content can also help thin it out. It can help uproot any negative mind states that are unwelcome. Every once in a while, as we're doing hearing in, you can check in with your thoughts and decide if they're more auditory or they're more visual. And you can get curious about your own unique configuration, about your patterns and proclivities. What situations really cause them to activate? What happens to your thoughts when other people are speaking to you? Do they quiet down or do they get louder? Can you hear the other person speaking, or do you immediately try to start planning what you're going to say and miss out on what they're saying? By observing the mind in this way, we care for it and we can come to master it, rather than being pulled around by the mind. We can learn to ride it and put it to use. And finally, if you have a lot of inner talk, you can try to come up with a name for one of the regular characters. Often we have a whole cast. There's the inner critic, the know-it-all, the anxious child, the obsessive list maker, the perfectionist. Who's in your head? How many characters are speaking? Are the roles useful? Are they effective? Or are they disruptive? At the end of your practice, it can be very helpful to keep a meditation journal. If you keep a journal of your practice, it's really a simple process. You're going to note what practice you did that day. You're going to note, you might note the feeling tone at the start of the practice. Were you distracted? Did you feel harried? Did you feel upset about something? And then what technique did you use? This case we're using hearing in or hearing rest. Did you start the practice with more hearing in and end hearing rest? Because the science dictates that if we keep track of our meditation in this way, we'll make progress and we'll have deeper kinds of insights. So it's a more immediate way to make progress on the path towards insight, clarity, equanimity, and concentration. So we can end this session for now, and I'll be back with you shortly to deliver another session. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to thank FCTV, Faribault Park and Rec, Faribault Community Center, and also, of course, thank the audience for showing up and participating. Have a beautiful day.